A migrant seeking asylum here in the U.S. from war in his home country of Mali and threats of violence in Brazil, now seeking legal action against the ICE facility in Batavia for alleged abuse at the hands of guards. The man's name is Lansine Sabide. He spent nearly a year in solitary confinement at the Buffalo Federal Detention Facility in Batavia and says the guards severely beat him, at one point breaking several of his fingers. The attorney representing Mr. Sabide says that she doesn't know where he is right now and that he's basically resisted deportation because he fears for his life. When it comes to the amount of time that he spent in solitary confinement, we've learned that that treatment appears common at the Batavia facility thanks to reporting from Investigative Post. The organization found that of the 126 detention centers across the country that ICE operates, only 4 locations locked up detainees in solitary confinement more often than the one in Batavia. So it's the 5th highest facility when you look at that type of punishment. Joining us now to talk about all this is J. Shoemaker with Investigative Post. I know you spent a lot of time looking into this. The numbers I'll ask you about in a moment, but first just this man's story and the case that he's now making against this facility.
Sure. So Mr. Sabide first came to the United States in 2022. He came from Sao Paulo, Brazil, where he had operated a coconut stand. He was selling coconuts. He got to know several American families who kind of split their time between there and here, and decided that he was going to try to make an asylum bid up in the United States after he had some issues with threats of violence down there in Brazil. So he comes to the United States in 2022, and he fails an interview meant to kind of screen detainees, or not detainees, but migrants for asylum. So upon failing that interview, he's taken into custody by ICE, which is where he remained for nearly 3 years, that his entire stay in the country. After getting shifted around to a couple different facilities, he ends up at the Batavia facility, which is where he spends the majority of his time. And after some conflicts with guards, he is essentially held in solitary confinement for the vast majority of that time, 10 months in total. So he tells in this complaint that was filed with the Civil Rights Office of the Department of Homeland Security of an instance where he was taken into a room, asked to sign what he was told were deportation papers. He could not read the documents themselves. He had a translator to kind of translate what the guards were saying to him, but did not have the documents themselves translated. And so because he couldn't read the documents, says he didn't want to sign them. Because he refused to sign them, he then says that in this complaint that guards took him into a holding cell where they severely beat him. They picked him up, they threw him on the ground, they put their body weight on him, they kicked him repeatedly, and when they were handcuffing him, they bent his fingers back in such a way that several of them broke. He was then taken to solitary confinement. In solitary confinement, he was denied medical treatment for a month. By the time a doctor finally saw him, he said, "Your fingers are not broken." Once he was released from solitary, he was basically going to be put in a kind of a similar situation in that same facility where he would spend 18 hours a day in lockup instead of 23 hours a day in lockup. He protested that and ended up back in solitary for 8 additional months.
And then the other thing I want to ask you about is, I mentioned there the numbers, right? In terms of raw numbers, solitary confinement has been used on folks 5th most here, but the distinction there is that this is a small facility compared to the ones that have even higher numbers. Yeah,
the Batavia facility is, half to a third of the size of some of these other massive ICE installations, particularly in the South, in like Louisiana, Texas, California, places like that. And there's a big one in Pennsylvania as well. And so Mr. Sadibe's story might seem very, very striking, that he's this kind of special case where he's held in solitary for so long, but the reality is he's not. Many detainees, despite the facility's kind of small size, are held in solitary there. About a third are held for a week or less, another third for 2 weeks or less, and another third for more than 2 weeks. And that's important to note because in New York State, solitary confinement over 15 days is considered torture. It is outlawed. Yeah. You might recall that the state prisons are currently protesting, that exact policy. The HALT Act, however, does not apply to federal facilities, and so ICE is free to hold men like Mr. Sadibe, primarily men, in that facility for as long as they want.
Yeah, excellent reporting. InvestigativePost.org. There's a lot more to this. I encourage you to read it. J. Shoemaker, thanks so much.
Thanks,
Good to see
Michael.
you.